Daniel was born literally into a game of crowns, a game of thrones. There was one kingdom taking over another kingdom, taking over another kingdom, taking over another kingdom, back to back to back to back. And this is the fire that Daniel was forged in. You had the Babylonians in the middle here on our map that had gone over and conquered the Israelites because they had no longer listened to God. And time again, they had turned away from him, and to the point where they just worshipped idols. And so God allowed the Babylonians to come across and take over everything that they had. And then during Daniel's life, the Persians down in that far left or right corner to you would end up working with the Medes, and they would take over this entire kingdom, and even they would take over Babylon and even go over into Egypt. And you had the Assyrians, and you had all these other kingdoms coming and going and stripping away whatever Israel had left. It is in this sort of game of thrones that Daniel is ushered in to his ministry. You see at the very beginning of the book of Daniel that when the Babylonians came across and took over the remaining part of southern Israel, the king had ordered to bring some of the Israelites, young men, without physical defect, handsome. Yeah, these are still the standards of pastors today, by the way. Young men without physical defect, handsome, showing aptitude for every kind of learning, yes? Well-informed, quick to understand, and qualified to serve in the king's palace. And if they're part of royal families, all the better. Because if you can take the kids of powerful royal families and send them on the other side of the continent or whatever, other side of the region, and put them into your service, they're much more obedient to you. And so they grab all the young, talented children and escort them across the empire to train them to serve into the king's court. They would teach them their language and their literature, and then they were put in after 3 years of training into this service. And it would be Daniel's experience to go through all this. And it started with Nebuchadnezzar, but these kingdoms gobbled up just kings and rulers like Skittles in a bowl. They fell one after the other, one power, one tyrant, one tyrant, one tyrant to another. From Nebuchadnezzar to Belshazzar, they would interact with Daniel. And he would grow throughout the years to be someone who was competent at what he did. He was really good at whatever he was asked to do. And on top of that, Daniel had the ability to have visions about the future and what was about to happen, and also interpret visions. And this was an incredible asset, yes? To be in tune with, the cosmos, to walk with God, to be able to answer these rulers' questions about the future and life, and to thrive underneath his care. This was something very much valued, and to the point where the Persians, after they had conquered Babylonia, the Persian emperor appoints Darius, and he sees this right away, and he begins to appoint all of these incredible administrators, but ends up putting Daniel as one of the 3 who would supervise all of them. And so at this point in our story, as we get closer, Daniel has lived through quite a bit. He's almost 60, let's say. He went into service very young. He served all of these tyrants and left and right. You've worked for those too. Slowly worked through that throughout your career. And now you can kind of see him as a seasoned, mature administrator, interpreter who walked with God, and people knew it. And so he's been put in charge of quite a few of these administrators. Now, Daniel so distinguished himself among the administrators and the satraps by his exceptional qualities that the king planned to set him over the entire kingdom. So these administrators and satraps, they were from affluent families mostly, rich kids, rich people's kids type of thing. And so they had their little fiefdoms, they had their little neighborhoods, little areas, and so they wanted power, they wanted control. And you know what was really weird about that time is that political parties would try and find scandals in other people's parties in order to take them down. Isn't that odd? That would go on back then. Thank goodness we've cleaned that up. But even back then, you had these same sort of power struggles among these power elite kind of people. That's all they strive for. And you see this being played out in Daniel's time. You know, things really haven't changed much. And so these administrators and satraps tried to find grounds for charges against Daniel in his conduct of government affairs. Oh, we can find something in there, right? Does he have documents in his house? Does he I don't know, has he stolen from something? Has he given things to the wrong group? Is there anything we can find? Let's just scrub it. And how many politicians today do you think would come out squeaky clean from a total audit of their life? I don't know. I guess you'll have to answer that yourself. But the government officials did this, and they couldn't find anything. Here's a lesson for you young folks out there if you're just starting out your careers. There are 3 characteristics that define a great employee, a great leader. Competence is one of them, right? If you're competent at what you do, you can almost make your own rules. Conscientious. People trust you. They know that what you say you'll do, right? They follow a code. And 3, they're just a skoge, kind of optimistic, I guess. They know how to communicate simply and positively. And if you can do that, you will normally thrive wherever you're at, and then you will create enemies around you because they're not like that, right? When you're the competent person in the room, people who aren't so competent tend to have grudges against you because that's humanity. Don't know why it is. Celebrate success wherever it is. But that is not what we're doing here. And it's interesting about the Jewish people. Here again is a minority thriving in a foreign land. Here is Israel thriving. Here is Joseph thriving, and then there was the Israelites thriving, and now here is Daniel thriving, and the people around him were upset about it. They didn't like this idea. Why would you let this foreigner brought into our country lead everything? So there's just a lot going on here, and Daniel's right at the heart of it. They couldn't find anything. So if you can't find anything, then we need to make something up. So they all got together and said, what do we know about Daniel that we can exploit, right? What do we know about him that we could bend? And so the administrators and the satraps came up with this plan. They went as a group to the king and said, "Oh, King Darius, live forever." You know what they're doing. Live forever. The royal administrators, prefects, satraps, advisors, and governors, that's everybody, folks, are there. And they all agreed that the king should issue an edict and enforce the decree that anyone who prays to any god or man during the next 30 days, except to you, O king, shall be thrown into the lion's den. Hubris is a good sin, yeah? Hubris, you can use hubris when people are prideful over their own, lordship. Oh, yeah, the devil can use that, and that's what we're seeing here right now. And of course, what could go wrong with an edict like that, says the king. I don't see anything wrong with that idea. Many of us would like to do that for 30 days, have the world worship us. He just happened to have the power to do it. And so he goes, let's do this. Everyone's going to worship me for 30 days. And if they don't, to the lion's den with you. Issue the decree and put it in writing so that it cannot be altered in accordance with the laws of the Medes and the Persians, which cannot be repealed. So King Darius put the decree in writing. So how that law worked, how their culture worked was, once the law was created, if anyone violated that law while it was in act, you could not reverse it. You just had to deal with the punishment. Now, you could certainly change it, but if you committed the act while the law was in effect, you had to follow through on the prescribed consequences, period. That's just the way their laws worked. And so he put it in writing. Now, when Daniel learned that the decree had been published, he went home to his upstairs room where the window was open toward Jerusalem. And 3 times a day, like he had always done before, he got down on his knees and he prayed, giving thanks to his God just as he had done before. If you have the bulletin, this is one of the key verses of this whole set on the back. So you can just kind of keep your eye on that, just kind of keep focused on that scripture set. Because this is the crux of all of it. Why in the world are we talking about Daniel? Why? Why am I talking about Daniel in the lion's den? The lion didn't chomp him. Spoiler alert. Why are we talking about any of this? Why is this important to us? Why are we talking about this right now? This is the key. When confronted with this tyrant, when confronted with this existential sort of life-threatening event, what does Daniel do? He does what he has always done. He walks with God. He turns and he prays. This is huge for us and what that means for our life, because unlike Daniel, I doubt you'll ever be thrown into a den with lions, not on purpose. But there are levels of hell in the world that we can get ourselves trapped into. Whether that be at work or at home or just health conditions or all sorts of difficulties that we struggle through. And God, time and time again, goes, I am with you. I am as close to you as your next breath. And whether you feel me being there, whether you're succeeding or failing, whether you're in prosperity or in misery, I am there with you. Talk to me. I've got you. And so we see this pattern over and over and over again. When he was stripped of his culture and sent on the other side of this ruling party, Daniel remembered who he was, and he continued the tradition that was passed on to him. And as now 39, and I have a grandkid, and there's this feeling that swells inside of you in your legacy years that you want to pass on that which you know brings life to your family, don't you? You want to teach the grandkids and your kids what brought success and what didn't. And in the Bible, we see those who came before us saying, this is what brought life. This is how we made it through difficult and good times. This is what God has called us to do and to be when we struggle, when we thrive. And so when we're in these positions, we fall back to our foundations, the roots, Psalm 1, that run deep and connect to the power source, yes? Deep roots. And so Daniel, throughout this entire time, has maintained his walk with God. And he prayed continually. He read the Word, talked to God continually. And each day, he knew these were the pieces that would bring life. Even if in the short term, it brought discomfort, in the long aim, following what God has called us to do, what he has said the world looks like, his worldview will always bring the greatest possible end. And we are not prosperity doctrine people. You may only have 2 fingers and 1 leg at the end. Don't get me wrong. But God created, and he knows the creation. And one of those pieces for Daniel, especially in times of difficulty, talk to me, says God. Pray, talk to me. And then Daniel turns over. And all of the great characters of the Bible turn over then the future results, the outcome to God. Do you honestly believe you know what you're going to be doing in 5 years? Now that I'm 39, I laugh at that idea. And the scriptures have changed how I work. I used to meticulously plan all the way to the end. I start with the end in mind and plan every detail. You know how often that worked in my career? That many times. And so you begin to realize I need to have a certain set of ideas, but my gosh, I need to trust someone else with my future. And that's what these great characters have done. They've remembered the past. They've been mindful of the future, but they lived every day grounded in these basic beliefs and acts and words. And Daniel is living that right now. Jesus said this, "If you hold on to my teaching, you will really be my disciples. Then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." See, liberty is a condition of the environment, right? This country believes in liberty, that you are given the space to live out whatever God's plan it is for your life. Freedom is a condition of the mind and the spirit. And there have been many writers who have been in prisons like those in the gulags and in the concentration camps that said that their captors had more liberty, but they had more freedom because they believed in God. Right? To set you free to truly live, even in the worst of it. And when I talk about Daniel, because he looks pretty squeaky clean, I don't want you to get the idea that it's about parting water. It's about doing some great act, about tumbling down the Tower of Babel, about changing the world. That is never the case, except in a few. It is always in the everyday ordinary that we can speak in truth and act in truth. And it's always in these subtle and very powerful ways. I was taught the faith by poor dirt farmers. They were not cruel people, but they spoke in truth. They acted in truth. And that's what I remember growing up. I remember these little pieces of these powerful men and women who taught so eloquently. Remember one day when I was just a kid, I was in the old truck, That was when trucks were trucks. They weren't all fancied out. And I was sitting there, and I had my hand outside the window as the bottom of a pasture. We were bringing in the cattle. And I had my hand out the window, and I was letting my hand hit the leaves of the sunflowers that were going by. And then my grandfather, who was driving, just stopped the truck, no emotion whatsoever, and said, "I want you to reach out with that same arm, and I want you to pull one of those sunflowers out of the ground. Just reach out and try and pull one out of the ground." So I reached out and I struggled and I tried and I tried. I said, "I can't." And he goes, "That'll rip your hand right off." And then he continued driving. To this very day, I remember him speaking in truth, this elegant, dirt poor farmer man. And to this day, whenever I put my hand out the window, I put it behind the rear view mirror. Make sure nothing hits my hand. It's amazing what we can learn, what we can pass on just by living out what we know will bring life, and to not follow idols that bring death. And that's what Daniel is doing. He's simply living that out, and what he knows brings life, period. Now, when Daniel learned that the decree had been published, again, he went upstairs and he prayed, right? He prayed. Well, that's exactly what they wanted. And so this group of hooligans knew where he was. They were waiting for it to happen, and they went right up to him. They grabbed him, and then they said to the king, "Daniel, who is one of the exiles from Judah, pays no attention to you, O king, or to the decree you put in writing. He still prays 3 times a day." When the king heard this, he was greatly distressed. All of a sudden, it all came rushing to him. The blood went back up to his brain. They did this in order to hurt Daniel, of which he valued as a competent, conscientious communicator. He made every effort to figure out how to undo this law, but like I said, even if he changed it at that moment, he still violated it while it was active, and there was nothing he could do. And so he gave the order. "Have Daniel be brought. Let's throw him into the lion's den." The king said to Daniel, "May your God, whom you serve, continually rescue you." Continually is used a lot. Everyone knows he is a man of God. Everyone knows he prays. Everyone knows this is who he is, right? It's a wonderful thing. A stone was brought and placed over the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet ring and with the rings of his nobles, so that Daniel's situation might not be changed. Also, I think it was wise of the king, everyone who makes accusation against Daniel, I want you to put your mark right here. So he's getting all the marks of all the people that accused Daniel in writing, on paper, on the seal. Do you think that'll come back later in the story? I'm just guessing. Maybe. And so, at the first light of dawn, the king got up and hurried to the lion's den. When he came near the den, he called out to Daniel in anguish, "Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to rescue you from the lion's den?" Daniel answered, "O king, live forever. My God sent his angel, and he shut the mouth of the lions. They have not hurt me, because I was found innocent in his sight, nor have I ever done anything wrong before you, O king." The king was overjoyed and gave orders to lift Daniel out of the den. And when Daniel was lifted from the den, no wound was found on him, because he had trusted his God. Remember a couple of Sundays back where I said David had that courage to do what was right because all the times before God had saved him. And it takes courage to put your trust in someone else for your life. And Daniel, over the many years of praying in a foreign land, had learned that you can trust God. And in the long aim, the long haul, it'll always produce the best outcome. God will be with you. He will have you. You trusted your God. And that's a very interesting thing, isn't it? Speaking and acting in truth may not be easy, pleasant, or immediately rewarded, but the opposite leads to regret and destruction. Every time we follow these other idols, every time we think, well, if I just lie here or I just agree with the group, it'll just be easier and I won't get in trouble. And, I'm seeking equilibrium. I don't want conflict. I don't want any of this. But it always leads to regret. Opposite of living and speaking the truth of God. Well, Daniel was working on the long aim, wasn't he? He was following God, and he was doing what he was doing every day of his life. And he was saved from the lion's den. What do you think happened to those who were playing the short game and just wanted immediate power, following their impulses? What do you think happened to them? If you have kids, plug their ears. At the king's command, the men who were falsely accused Daniel were brought in and thrown into the lion's den, along with their wives and their children. It was a different time. But what does that say when you're always aiming for the short and turning away from God and following idols? Not only does it hurt you, who does it hurt? Yeah, this is a lesson. It's like, this is not good, yeah? But God brings life. And before they reached the floor of the den, the lions overpowered them and crushed all their bones. And then a decree was issued that every part of the kingdom, every part of my kingdom, people must fear and revere the God of Daniel. So Daniel prospered during the reign of Darius and the reign of Cyrus of Persia. Isn't this amazing? That's why Daniel turned his future over. Do you think Daniel thought this was going to happen? Do you think Darius thought this was happen, or Cyrus thought this was going to happen, or the people, or the satraps? Do you think anyone thought this was going to happen? No. He did every day. He walked with God. He did what he believed was right. And look. See, that's the greatest aim of all as we finish up today, is to have Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior and follow his teachings in gratitude, that foundation of gratitude in our life. See, this is the longest and highest aim over the long haul. Jesus says, thieves, idols, come only to steal and kill and destroy. I have come that you may have life and have it abundantly. Have it to the full, right over the rim, bubbling over, until you sprinkle life on others. And we thank him for it. Amen.